The morning frost clung to the brittle grass like tiny diamonds, beautiful but deadly to a man whose livelihood depended on what grew from the soil. Jack Mitchell watched his breath cloud in the frigid Montana air as he counted his remaining cattle. 12. Just 12, where 30 had grazed last spring. His calloused fingers tightened around the fence post he was failing to repair. The wood, like his hope, was splintering. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sometimes the land takes more than it gives, his father used to say, but Jack never expected it would take everything. The pre-dawn light painted Silver Creek in shades of gray, the mountains in the distance standing sentinel over the struggling town like ancient, indifferent gods. Jack Mitchell moved through his morning routine with the mechanical precision of a man who continued living out of habit rather than hope. Coffee boiled over a reluctant flame, boots laced with fraying strings, hat placed on his head, his father's. A hat worn thin at the brim, but still sturdy enough to shield his eyes from a sun that offered light without warmth. The ranch house creaked beneath his weight, protesting like an old friend too polite to ask him to leave, but too honest to pretend all was well. Jack stepped onto the porch and surveyed what remained of Sundown Ranch. 3 generations of Mitchells had worked this land, coaxing life from the stubborn soil, building something from nothing. Now that something was fading back to nothing. Under his watch, the drought had destroyed his hayfields. Market prices had crushed what little profit margin remained. The bank, specifically Richard Blackwell with his pressed suits and precise words, had given him until the end of the month. After that, the land would go to auction, most likely to the development company that had been swallowing failing ranches across the county for the past 2 years. Jack whistled for Duke, the border collie who represented his last faithful companion. The dog bounded from behind the barn, tail wagging despite the circumstances, loyalty undiminished by poverty. "At least one of us is still optimistic," Jack murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. He walked the property line as the sun crested the eastern ridge, counting the broken fence posts, the loose wires, the problems he could no longer afford to fix. His cattle, thin from poor grazing, watched him with wary eyes, as if they too suspected their fate had been sealed. Jack remembered when the pastures had been full, when his father's laughter had echoed across the valley, when his mother's garden had burst with color against the cabin wall. Now, weeds claimed what had once been her pride. The last rose bush had withered during the second summer of drought, its petals scattered like memories too painful to gather. Jack reached the northern corner of his property where a small stream still trickled, defiant against the dry years. He knelt and splashed cold water on his face, the shock of it a welcome distraction from the thoughts circling like vultures in his mind. When he looked up, he caught his reflection, a man of 34, whose eyes had aged decades beyond his years. His father would have called it character. Jack called it failure. The sound of tires on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. He straightened, squinting toward the long driveway leading to the main road. Few people came to Sundown Ranch these days. Fewer still brought good news. Miguel's truck appeared around the bend, dust trailing behind it like a surrender flag. Jack's shoulders relaxed slightly. Miguel Rodriguez had been his father's friend before becoming his, the closest thing to family he had left in Silver Creek. If anyone understood the weight of the land, it was Miguel. "Jack!" Miguel called, climbing from his truck with the stiffness of a man who'd spent too many years on horseback. "You're looking worse than your fences," Jack managed a thin smile. "And you're as charming as ever." Miguel clapped a hand on his shoulder, the casual gesture conveying more support than words. "Could manage. Martha sent these." He handed over a paper bag that smelled of fresh biscuits. "Said you probably haven't been eating properly." Jack accepted the gift with a nod of thanks. Martha Wilson had owned the general store since before he was born, extending credit when she shouldn't and pretending not to notice when families like his couldn't fully settle their accounts. "How bad is it?" Miguel asked, gesturing toward the ranch. "Bad enough." Jack didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Miguel sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I came by to tell you, there's talk in town. The Hargrove woman is looking for help." Hargrove, the name registered dimly in Jack's memory. From the old mining family? Dorothy Hargrove. Returned a few months back, bought that timber house on Blue Ridge. She's offering room and board, plus wages for property maintenance. Nothing fancy, just upkeep for an old woman living alone. Jack's pride flickered briefly before reality doused it. "I'm not looking for charity." Miguel's expression hardened. "It's not charity, it's work. And it's not like you have many options left." The truth of the statement hung between them like a physical presence. Jack turned away, focusing on the distant mountains. "I've got a ranch to run." "You've got a ranch to lose," Miguel countered, not unkindly. "Take the job, Jack. At least meet the woman. Keep a roof over your head while you figure things out." Later that afternoon, Jack found himself driving his father's ancient pickup toward Blue Ridge. The truck protested the incline, engine coughing like it shared his reluctance. Pinecrest Lodge appeared around a bend, nestled among towering pines. It was smaller than he expected, weathered but dignified, with a stone chimney releasing wisps of smoke into the clear air. Jack parked and sat for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel. Duke whined from the passenger seat, sensing his discomfort. "This isn't surrender," Jack told himself as much as the dog. "It's strategy." He approached the front door, noting the well-maintained garden that surrounded the house. Whoever Dorothy Hargrove was, she cared for growing things, a quality Jack couldn't help but respect. He knocked, the sound echoing against the timber walls. The door opened to reveal a woman whose appearance defied easy categorization. She was small in stature but stood perfectly straight, her silver hair cut in a practical bob that framed a face lined with both age and character. Her eyes, startlingly blue against her weathered skin, assessed him with an intelligence that made Jack straighten his posture instinctively. "You must be Mitchell's boy," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "Martha said you might come by." Jack removed his hat. "Jack Mitchell, Mum. I understand you're looking for help with your property." Dorothy Hargrove studied him for a moment longer, then stepped aside. "Come in. We'll discuss terms over tea." The interior of Pinecrest Lodge was modest but comfortable, furnished with pieces that spoke of quality rather than showiness. Books lined the walls, interrupted occasionally by geological specimens displayed on small shelves, quartz crystals, mineral formations, and what looked like ore samples. "Sit," Dorothy commanded, gesturing toward a chair at the kitchen table. "Your dog can come in too, I don't mind the company." Jack whistled softly, and Duke padded in, settling at his feet with a contented sigh. Dorothy busied herself with a kettle that had already been heating on the stove. "Sugar?" she asked. "No, thank you." She placed a steaming mug before him, then lowered herself into the chair opposite. "I'll be direct, Mr. Mitchell. I need someone to maintain this property. Chop wood, clear gutters, fix what breaks, and keep predators away from my chickens. In return, I offer the guest cabin, meals, and fair wages." "May I ask why you returned to Silver Creek, Mrs. Hargrove?" Jack ventured, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "Ms.," she corrected. "And it's my business why I came back. Yours is to decide whether you want the job." Jack sipped his tea to hide his reaction. There was something refreshing about her bluntness. No pity, no delicate dancing around his circumstances. "I have a ranch," he said finally. "A failing one, from what I hear." Her expression softened marginally at his flinch. That wasn't meant as cruelty, just acknowledgement of reality. The offer stands regardless of your reasons for accepting or declining. Jack looked around the room, his gaze landing on a black and white photograph on the mantel. It showed a young woman standing proudly beside a man in mining gear, both smiling with the confident optimism of youth. "My father and me," Dorothy said, following his gaze. 1962, when we still believed the Blue Ridge had centuries of silver to give. The mine closed before I was born. Everything closes eventually, Mr. Mitchell. That doesn't mean it had no value. The words settled between them, carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. Jack finished his tea and set down the mug with careful deliberation. "I can start tomorrow," he said. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "But I'll need mornings free to tend to my remaining stock." Dorothy nodded once, an agreement sealed without unnecessary elaboration. "The cabin needs airing out. You can move in when you're ready." As Jack drove back down the mountain, Duke, beside him and the afternoon light turning golden over the valley, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a decision far more significant than accepting temporary employment. The road ahead curved sharply, obscuring what waited beyond. Much like the turn his life had just taken. The cabin proved to be a single room with a small bathroom attached, sparse but clean, with a view of the valley that would have cost millions in a different context. Jack moved in with embarrassing ease, his life reduced to a duffel bag of clothes, his father's toolbox, and a photograph of his parents on their 20th anniversary. Duke claimed the rug before the small wood stove, as if he'd been waiting for just such a spot his entire life. The first week established a rhythm. Jack rose before dawn to drive down to Sundown Ranch, feeding his cattle and performing basic maintenance to prevent further deterioration. By mid-morning, he would return to Pinecrest, where Dorothy always had a list waiting. Split wood, repair the chicken coop, clear brush from the property line. She never hovered, but occasionally appeared with water or coffee, watching his work, with those assessing blue eyes before offering a nod and returning to her own tasks. They shared dinner each evening, Dorothy proving to be an unexpectedly good cook. Their conversations remained practical, focused on the next day's work or observations about weather patterns. Sometimes she would ask about his cattle or his training. Of Duke, never once did she mention the bank or the impending loss of his family land. On the 8th day, Jack arrived to find Dorothy struggling to reach a book on a high shelf in what she called her study, a small room lined with geological texts and mining journals. "Let me," he offered, easily retrieving the volume she pointed to. "Thank you," she said, taking the book. "Being short was less inconvenient when I was young enough to climb." Jack glanced at the title, Geochemical Analysis of Silver Deposits in Western Montana. "Light reading?" he asked, a small smile tugging at his lips. Dorothy's expression remained serious. "Knowledge doesn't expire, Mr. Mitchell. Neither does curiosity." She opened the book on her desk, revealing pages marked with notes in a precise, slanting hand. Jack caught glimpses of diagrams, chemical formulas, and what looked like survey coordinates. "Were you a geologist?" he asked. "Among other things." She closed the book. The roof over the back porch is sagging. That should be today's priority. Jack recognized the dismissal, but found his curiosity piqued. The photographs around the house showed a young Dorothy in various locations, standing before mine entrances, examining rock formations, always with the focused expression of someone pursuing knowledge rather than posing for posterity. Later that afternoon, as Jack replaced rotted support beams on the porch, he noticed Dorothy in the garden, kneeling despite her age to tend seedlings with careful hands. There was a gentleness to her movements that contrasted with her brisk manner, a tenderness reserved for growing things that resonated with his own connection to the land. When she looked up and caught him watching, Jack expected rebuke. Instead, she beckoned him over. "These are heritage tomatoes," she explained, indicating the seedlings. "My mother grew them when I was a child. The seeds came all the way from Italy with my grandfather." Jack knelt beside her, examining the delicate plants. "My mother had a garden, roses mainly, but vegetables too. I haven't been able to keep it going." "Drought is unforgiving," Dorothy acknowledged. "But these," she gestured to the seedlings, "these are survivors, the genetic memory of generations of plants that endured and adapted." Jack looked at her, struck by the passion in her voice. "Like people." "Some people," she corrected, her eyes meeting his with unexpected warmth. "Those who bend without breaking." That evening, Dorothy asked about his parents for the first time, listening intently as Jack described his father's patient instruction in ranching and his mother's quiet strength. He found himself speaking more than he had in months, perhaps years, the words flowing easier with each passing minute. "They sound like good people," Dorothy said when he finally fell silent. "The kind who understood that wealth isn't always measured in dollars." "Fat lot of good that philosophy did me," Jack replied, bitterness slipping through before he could catch it. "The bank doesn't accept good intentions as payment." Dorothy's expression remained neutral. "How much do you owe?" The directness of the question startled Jack into honesty. "Enough. The drought hit 3 years running. Had to take loans for feed, then more when the well needed work. Market prices fell and..." He spread his hands. "You know how it ends." "I know how this chapter ends," Dorothy corrected. "Books have many chapters, Mr. Mitchell." The following day, Jack arrived to find a sleek black car parked outside Pinecrest Lodge. The vehicle was jarringly out of place in the rustic setting, like a raven among sparrows. Inside, he found Dorothy seated across from a thin man in an expensive suit, their conversation halting abruptly at his entrance. "Ah, Mr. Mitchell," Dorothy greeted him. "This is my nephew, Victor Hargrove. Victor, this is Jack Mitchell, who helps maintain the property." Victor Hargrove stood with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to making impressions. His handshake was firm but brief, his smile practiced. "The rancher," Victor said, the word carrying an undefinable weight. Dorothy mentioned she'd hired local help. How rustic. Jack nodded without returning the smile. There was something in Victor's tone that raised his hackles, a dismissiveness that felt calculated. "I should check on that leak in the north gutter," Jack said to Dorothy, "unless you need something else first." "The gutter can wait," she replied. Victor was just leaving. A flash of irritation crossed Victor's features before his smile reasserted itself. "Always so eager to be rid of me, Aunt Dorothy. One might think you didn't appreciate family connections." "I appreciate genuine ones," she returned evenly. "Give my regards to your wife." After Victor departed, Dorothy remained unusually quiet, staring out the window as his car disappeared down the mountain road. "Everything all right?" Jack ventured. "Family," Dorothy sighed, the single word laden with complicated emotion. "Always believing blood entitles them to opinions, or assets." Jack hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since Victor's arrival. "He doesn't approve of you hiring me." Dorothy turned, her expression sharpening. "Victor doesn't approve of anything that doesn't benefit Victor. Pay him no mind." She straightened her shoulders. "Now, about that gutter." The encounter left Jack unsettled. He worked through the afternoon with mechanical efficiency, his thoughts circling around Victor Hargrove's apparent disdain and Dorothy's dismissal of her nephew's concerns. There were dynamics at play he didn't understand, currents beneath the surface of Dorothy's seemingly simple life in Silver Creek. That evening, Dorothy broke their comfortable routine by producing a bottle of good whiskey after dinner. She poured 2 modest glasses, sliding one toward Jack, with an expression that brooked no refusal. "My father believed a small measure of this improved conversation," she explained. "Tonight I find myself in need of improved conversation." Jack accepted the glass, waiting for her to continue. "How much time do you have left at your ranch?" she asked directly. 3 weeks, Jack admitted after a moment. "Then auction." Dorothy nodded, taking a small sip of her whiskey. "And what will you do after?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Jack had been avoiding it, focusing on each day's work rather than the looming reality of his family legacy slipping through his fingers. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Find work, I suppose." Miguel mentioned outfits in Wyoming, looking for experienced hands. "And leave Silver Creek?" "Not much here for me without the ranch." Dorothy studied him over the rim of her glass. "What if there could be?" Jack frowned, uncertain of her meaning. "Mom, I have a proposition, Mr. Mitchell. One that might benefit us both." She set down her glass with deliberate care. "I find myself in need of more than occasional maintenance. This property requires management, someone with knowledge of the land, someone who understands stewardship rather than exploitation." "You're offering me a full-time position?" "I'm offering you a partnership of sorts." Dorothy's gaze was steady, evaluating. "I have assets that require management, decisions that need making. I'm 75, Mr. Mitchell. I don't have unlimited time to secure what matters to me." Jack's confusion must have shown on his face, because Dorothy continued, with uncharacteristic hesitation. "What I'm proposing is a marriage of convenience, Mr. Mitchell." The whiskey Jack had just sipped burned suddenly in his throat. What? You heard correctly. A legal arrangement that would secure your position here and protect certain assets from interference." Her eyes flickered toward the window, in the direction Victor's car had disappeared. "Miss Hargrove, Jack struggled to find words. I can't what? Accept a practical solution to both our problems." Dorothy's tone was matter-of-fact. "I'm not proposing romance, Mr. Mitchell. I'm 75 years old. What I'm offering is security for both of us." Jack set down his glass, his mind reeling. "Why me? You barely know me." "I know enough." Dorothy's expression softened slightly. "I know you work without complaint. I know you care for animals, with gentleness and land with respect. I know your handshake means something, and you look people in the eye when you speak." She paused. "Those qualities are rarer than you might think." Jack stood, needing movement to process her words. "This is unexpected. The best opportunities often are." Dorothy remained seated, watching him. "Think about it. You don't need to answer tonight." Later, in the small cabin with Duke curled at his feet, Jack stared at the ceiling, sleep. Impossible as Dorothy's proposition circled in his mind. Marriage to a woman 40 years his senior, a woman of mystery and means, whose motives remained unclear. The proposition should have been easy to dismiss as absurd, yet he found himself considering it with increasing seriousness as the night deepened. What did he have to lose? His ranch was gone regardless, his future uncertain at best. And Dorothy, enigmatic, direct, surprisingly kind Dorothy, was offering a path forward, albeit an unconventional one. Dawn found him still awake, a decision taking shape as the first light painted the valley in gentle gold. The courthouse in Silver Creek had seen better days. Paint peeled from the columns like old skin, and the wooden steps creaked under Jack's boots as he ascended, hat in hand. Inside, the air smelled of dust and paper, a mustiness that suggested some documents hadn't been disturbed in decades. Dorothy stood beside him, dressed in a simple blue suit that somehow made her look more formidable than fragile. Her spine was straight, her expression composed, betraying nothing of the extraordinary step they were about to take. 3 days had passed since her proposition. 3 days of Jack walking the perimeter of his failing ranch at dawn, watching the sun cast long shadows across land that would soon belong to strangers. 3 days of weighing pride against practicality, tradition against survival. In the end, practicality won. What was pride worth if it left him with nothing but memories? "You're certain?" he'd asked Dorothy that morning, giving her one final chance to withdraw her offer. "I've never made a decision I wasn't certain of," she'd replied, adjusting a simple silver brooch on her lapel. "The question is whether you are." Jack wasn't certain. Not about this arrangement, not about his future, not about anything except the crushing weight of impending loss. But he nodded anyway. "I am." Now they stood before Judge Marshall, a man with tired eyes and a receding hairline who had known Jack's father and grandfather. The judge's eyebrows had risen slightly when they stated their purpose, but to his credit, he asked no unnecessary questions. "Marriage is a legal contract," Judge Marshall recited, his voice carrying the cadence of words spoken many times before, but also a commitment to mutual support, respect, and partnership. "Do you both enter into this contract with full understanding of its implications?" "We do," Dorothy answered firmly. Jack hesitated only a fraction of a second before adding his own, "Yes." The ceremony, if it could be called that, was brief and austere. No flowers, no music, no witnesses except Miguel, who stood awkwardly in the corner, concern etched across his weathered features. When the judge pronounced them married, there was no kiss, only a handshake between Jack and Dorothy that sealed their arrangement with dignified simplicity. Miguel approached afterward, embracing Jack with gruff affection. "You know what you're doing, amigo?" he murmured. "Not really," Jack admitted, "but I'm out of alternatives." Miguel glanced at Dorothy, who was speaking with the clerk about filing paperwork. "There are always alternatives. Not ones I can live with." Jack squared his shoulders. "It's done now." As they left the courthouse, stepping into the sharp autumn sunlight, Jack noticed Dorothy scanning the street with unusual vigilance. "Expecting someone?" he asked. "Always," she replied cryptically. Then, with a brisk nod toward her truck, "Shall we?" The drive back to Pinecrest Lodge passed in contemplative silence. Jack watched the landscape roll by, the struggling town, giving way to ponderosa pines, the road winding higher until Silver Creek spread below them like a faded quilt. His life had just changed fundamentally, yet everything around him remained the same, the trees indifferent, the mountains unmoved. "What happens now?" he finally asked as they approached the lodge. Dorothy's hands remained steady on the steering wheel. "Now we continue as before. You have work to do on your ranch until the auction. I have my own affairs to manage. Our arrangement changes nothing in practical terms, except I'm legally your husband." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "On paper only, Mr. Mitchell. I have no expectation of traditional marital obligations." Jack felt heat rise to his face. "I I know what you meant." Dorothy's voice softened slightly. "We are partners now, aligned in purpose if not in age or circumstance. That's all this needs to be." Upon reaching the lodge, Dorothy disappeared into her study with a brief instruction that Jack should take the afternoon to tend to his ranch matters. He did so gladly. The normalcy of physical labor, a welcome distraction from the strangeness of his new status. Duke followed him about the property, sensing his disquiet and staying closer than usual. The following morning, Jack woke in the guest cabin to find an envelope had been slipped under his door sometime during the night. Inside was a bank card and a note in Dorothy's precise handwriting. "For ranch expenses. The PIN is 1962. No signature. No explanation needed." Jack stared at the card, warring emotions churning in his gut. Was this charity, payment, a test, Whatever Dorothy's intention, he couldn't bring himself to use it. Not yet. Not until he better understood what he'd gotten himself into. He tucked the card into his wallet and went about his morning routine, determined to maintain some semblance of normalcy. When he arrived at the main house later that morning, Dorothy was on the phone, her voice carrying an edge he hadn't heard before. "The arrangement is perfectly legal, Victor. Your concerns, while noted, are irrelevant." She paused, listening. "That sounds remarkably like a threat, which I advise against. You know I've never responded well to coercion." She glanced up, noticing Jack in the doorway, and gestured for him to enter while continuing her conversation. "The trustee agreement stands. Any attempt to contest it will only result in additional provisions that I assure you will be less favorable to your interests." Another pause, longer this time. Dorothy's expression hardened. "Then do what you must. So will I." She hung up without farewell, placing the receiver down with deliberate care. "Problem?" Jack inquired, setting his toolbox on the kitchen counter. Dorothy straightened papers on the table with methodical precision. "Nothing unexpected. Victor believes money he hasn't earned should nonetheless be his by virtue of shared ancestry." Her eyes met Jack's, sharp and evaluating. "He's displeased by our marriage. How did he find out already?" "Small towns have long memories and short secrets." Dorothy folded her hands. "Judge Marshall's clerk is Victor's third cousin by marriage. Information travels." Jack considered this, understanding now why Dorothy had scanned the street after the ceremony. "Is that why you wanted to marry? To keep your nephew from something that's yours?" "Partially," she admitted, "but not entirely. Victor's interest is a symptom, not the disease." Before Jack could press further, Dorothy changed the subject, discussing a fallen tree that needed clearing from the North Access Road. The moment for revelations had passed, at least for now. Days slipped into a pattern. Jack divided his time between Sundown Ranch, preparing for the inevitable auction, and Pinecrest Lodge, where his duties remained unchanged despite his new title. He and Dorothy continued to share meals and occasional conversation, neither acknowledging the legal bond they'd created nor its implications. Jack noticed subtle changes, however. Dorothy began including him in decisions about property improvements. Files appeared on the kitchen table. Surveys, water rights documents, timber assessments, left open as if accidentally, though Jack suspected nothing Dorothy did was ever accidental. She was educating him, piece by piece, about assets he now had a connection to, however tenuous. A week after their courthouse ceremony, Jack returned from town to find a familiar black car parked outside Pinecrest Lodge. His stomach tightened as he recognized Victor's vehicle. Duke growled low in his throat, sensing Jack's tension. "Easy," Jack murmured, though he shared the dog's instinctive wariness. Inside, he found Dorothy and Victor engaged in what appeared to be a standoff, both seated but radiating opposing energies. Dorothy's contained precision against Victor's coiled aggression. A third man Jack didn't recognize stood by the fireplace, his expensive suit and portfolio marking him as a lawyer. "Ah, the new husband arrives," Victor drawled, his smile tight. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing your hasty nuptials." Jack removed his hat, but remained standing, positioning himself slightly behind Dorothy's chair. "Mr. Hargrove." "It's Dr. Hargrove, actually," Victor corrected, "though I practice finance rather than medicine, fixing broken balance sheets instead of broken bodies." "Victor believes our marriage requires his approval," Dorothy explained, her tone deceptively mild. "I've been explaining the limitations of his authority." The lawyer cleared his throat. "What Dr. Hargrove is concerned about, Ms. Hargrove—" "Mrs. Mitchell," Dorothy interrupted, "if we're being formal." The correction visibly irritated Victor. "What my attorney is trying to say, Aunt Dorothy, is that this sudden marriage to a man half your age, a financially distressed rancher no less, raises obvious concerns about undue influence and capacity. Jack tensed, understanding the implication. You think I coerced your aunt into marriage for money? The timing is certainly suspicious, Victor replied. Your ranch faces foreclosure and suddenly you're married to one of the oldest mining heiresses in the state? The courts tend to notice such convenient coincidences. The courts also notice when family members attempt to control elderly relatives through false claims of incapacity, Dorothy countered. A strategy that failed when you tried it 3 years ago, if you recall. Victor's smile faltered. That was a misunderstanding. Your entire life has been a misunderstanding, Victor. Dorothy rose, her small stature somehow commanding the room. Now, unless you have actual legal business beyond baseless threats, I believe we're finished. Mr. Preston can forward any legitimate concerns to my attorney. The lawyer, Preston, shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Mitchell, we're only trying to protect family interests. My interests have never aligned with Victor's. Dorothy cut him off. A fact documented extensively in my legal arrangements. Good day, gentlemen. Victor stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with deliberate movements. This isn't finished, Aunt Dorothy. A marriage this absurd won't stand up to proper scrutiny. His gaze shifted to Jack. And you, whatever she promised you, it won't be worth what's coming. After they departed, Dorothy remained standing, staring out the window until Victor's car disappeared down the mountain road. Only then did her shoulders relax slightly. You didn't tell me he'd tried to have you declared incompetent, Jack said quietly. There are many things I haven't told you. Dorothy turned to face him. Some relevant to our arrangement, some not. Victor's previous attempts to access my assets fall into the former category. Why does he think you have money? This place is nice but hardly luxurious. Dorothy's expression revealed nothing. Victor believes what Victor wishes to believe. Reality has never been his primary concern. That evening, Dorothy broke their routine by suggesting they drive into town for dinner at Silver Creek's only restaurant, The Pioneer. Jack was surprised but agreed, changing into his one decent shirt, kept for church and funerals, before meeting her at the truck. The Pioneer was busy, Friday night bringing out locals seeking respite from home cooking and isolation. Their entrance caused a noticeable ripple of reaction, conversations pausing, glances darting their way before resuming with increased intensity. News of their marriage had clearly spread throughout Silver Creek. Elaine Parker, the town librarian, approached their table after they were seated. Dorothy Hargrove, she said warmly, or should I say Mitchell now? It's been ages since you graced us with your presence. Hello, Elaine. Dorothy's smile was genuine if reserved. Yes, I've been remiss in my social obligations. Well, we're all just pleased to see you out and about. Elaine's gaze shifted to Jack, and with such handsome company. Jack nodded awkwardly, unused to being the subject of curious attention. Ms. Parker, you two make a striking pair, Elaine continued, clearly fishing for details. Rather sudden, though. I don't recall hearing any engagement announcement. Some decisions don't require public deliberation, Dorothy replied smoothly. Jack and I found we share compatible values and interests. The rest followed naturally. The explanation was vague enough to reveal nothing while suggesting a depth of connection that didn't exist. Jack admired Dorothy's deft handling of the inquiry, recognizing that this dinner was not simply about food. It was a strategic appearance, establishing their marriage as legitimate in the eyes of the community. Throughout the meal, other townspeople stopped by their table, some with transparent curiosity, others with genuine well-wishes. Dorothy handled each interaction with gracious brevity, neither encouraging extended conversation nor appearing dismissive. Jack followed her lead, speaking when addressed but offering no elaboration on their relationship. As they were finishing, Dessert, Richard Blackwell, the banker who held the loans on Sundown Ranch, approached with calculated casualness. Mitchell, he nodded to Jack, then turned to Dorothy. Ms. Hargrove, a pleasure to see you in town. Mrs. Mitchell, Dorothy corrected again, her tone pleasant but firm. And the pleasure is mutual, Mr. Blackwell. How is Margaret, still suffering with her arthritis? The personal question momentarily flustered the banker. She has good days, and bad. Jack, I was hoping to discuss the upcoming auction. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting next week to review the final arrangements. Jack felt Dorothy's gaze on him, assessing his response. Actually, he said, finding his voice, steadier than expected, I'd like to discuss options for settling the outstanding balance before auction. Blackwell's expression shifted to one of rehearsed regret. I'm afraid we're well past that point. The paperwork is already... I believe my husband is suggesting a meeting to pay off the loans in full, Dorothy interjected. Monday morning would be convenient for us. Shall we say 9 o'clock? The banker's practiced composure faltered. Payoff? That would require substantial capital, Dorothy finished for him. Yes, Monday at 9 then. After Blackwell departed visibly unsettled, Jack stared at Dorothy across the table. What was that about? Strategy, she replied simply, dabbing her lips with a napkin. Victor isn't the only one who responds to displays of strength. You're going to pay off my ranch loans? Jack kept his voice low despite his bewilderment. We are going to secure your property, yes. Dorothy placed her napkin beside her plate with precise alignment. It's a sound investment, regardless of our personal arrangement. Jack studied her, trying to reconcile the modest timber house and practical lifestyle with the casual mention of paying off debts that had accumulated over years of struggle. Just how much money do you have, Dorothy? Enough for what matters. She signaled for the check. Now, thanks to our appearance here, everyone in Silver Creek will be discussing how poor Jack Mitchell married rich old Dorothy Hargrove for her money. Exactly the narrative Victor expects, and one that will lead him precisely where I want. Him. Jack drove them back to Pinecrest Lodge in contemplative silence, Dorothy's words echoing in his mind. She was using their marriage as misdirection. But for what purpose? And why involve him, a struggling rancher with nothing to offer but labor and loyalty? The answers began to emerge the following morning. Jack woke to find Dorothy already dressed and waiting on the porch of the main house, a thermos of coffee and a folder beside her. We're taking a drive, she announced without preamble. Where to? The past, in a manner of speaking. She handed him the thermos. You'll want this. They took Dorothy's truck, heading not down the mountain toward Silver Creek, but up a narrower road that wound higher into the pine-covered slopes. Jack had never ventured this direction, though he'd noticed the access road during his property maintenance. After 20 minutes of increasingly rough terrain, the trees opened to reveal a clearing, dominated by what remained of mining operations. The weathered frame of a head frame, collapsed outbuildings, and the dark mouth of a tunnel entrance partially sealed with timbers. Blue Ridge Mine, Dorothy said, her voice carrying an emotion Jack couldn't quite identify. My grandfather started it in 1902. My father expanded it, and I closed it in 1978. Jack surveyed the abandoned site, noting the careful way it had been decommissioned. No casual collapse here, but a deliberate closure that had preserved the essential structure while preventing access. Silver played. Out? He asked. No. Dorothy's response was unexpectedly sharp. That's what we let people believe, what Victor believes, what everyone in Silver Creek accepts as truth. She exited the truck, walking with purpose toward a small structure that had once been an office, its tin roof now rusted but intact. From her pocket, she produced a key ring with a single key that looked as old as the building itself. Inside, dust motes danced in the light streaming through grimy windows. Filing cabinets lined one wall, a large table dominated the center, and maps covered much of the available wall space. Dorothy moved to a cabinet, unlocking it with a different key from the same ring. "In 1976, my father made a discovery," she explained, withdrawing a thick folder. "We were following a promising silver vein when the composition changed. Core samples revealed something unexpected." She opened the folder on the table, revealing geological reports, assay results, and survey maps. Jack leaned closer, trying to make sense of the technical information. "What am I looking at?" "The reason the Blue Ridge mine officially failed, when in fact it contained more wealth than anyone suspected." Dorothy pointed to figures circled in red pencil. "Rare earth elements, specifically concentrations of neodymium, dysprosium, and other minerals essential for modern technology. Valuable now, but virtually unknown to most miners in the 1970s. Jack looked up from the reports, understanding beginning to dawn. "You knew what you had." "My father knew. He was more geologist than miner by then, reading journals, corresponding with researchers. He recognized what we'd found, elements that would become crucial for everything from wind turbines to smartphones." Dorothy's finger traced a survey line on one of the maps, but he also knew that if word got out, the large mining corporations would find ways to take it from us. Environmental regulations were minimal, corporate tactics ruthless. "So you shut it down instead," Jack said, pieces falling into place. "Made everyone think it had failed." Dorothy nodded, satisfaction in her eyes at his comprehension. "We sealed the richest veins, filed modest closure reports, and waited. My father didn't live to see how valuable these deposits would become, but he knew they would." "Does Victor know?" "He suspects something. The family trust that controls the mining rights has unusually strong protections. He's tried various ways to gain control, including having me declared incompetent when I refused to sell to a conglomerate he'd aligned with." She closed the folder with deliberate care. "What he doesn't know is that I've been quietly buying, surrounding land for decades, securing water rights, and preparing for a very specific type of development." "What type?" "Sustainable, controlled extraction. Not the massive open-pit operations that destroy mountains and poison watersheds, but targeted mining with environmental protections exceeding any current regulations." Dorothy's expression intensified. "This valley could provide materials for the next generation of renewable energy technology, Jack. Not just profit, but purpose." Jack absorbed this information, understanding now why Dorothy had sought a partner she could trust. "And our marriage?" "Protects this vision. The trust provisions include specific clauses about spousal rights that supersede other family claims. By marrying you, I've ensured Victor cannot force development decisions after I'm gone." She met his gaze directly. "You now have legal standing to continue what my father started." "You barely know me," Jack said, echoing his objection from when she first proposed their arrangement. "How can you trust me with something this valuable?" "I observe, I evaluate, I decide." Dorothy's certainty was absolute. "You understand stewardship. You value land beyond its immediate yield. Those qualities are rarer than the elements beneath our feet." They spent hours at the mine office, Dorothy explaining decades of planning with the precision of someone who had considered every contingency. Jack learned that her modest lifestyle wasn't from lack of means, but strategic choice. Attention drew predators, whether corporate or familial. The Hargrove wealth existed largely on paper and in potential, substantial but not liquid, tied to land and mineral rights rather than bank accounts. As the afternoon light began to fade, Dorothy locked the filing cabinet and office with the same careful deliberation with which she did everything. "Monday we secure your ranch," she said as they returned to the truck, "not as charity, but as part of a larger strategy. The land connects to water sources vital for sustainable operations. More importantly, it keeps you whole. And if I'd refused to marry you, then I would have found another approach. Dorothy started the engine. I've spent decades planning for contingencies, Jack. You weren't the first solution I considered, but you were the most fitting when circumstances aligned. That night, alone in the guest cabin with Duke snoring softly by the stove, Jack contemplated the extraordinary turn his life had taken. 2 weeks ago, he had been a failing rancher facing the loss of generations of family legacy. Now he was married to a woman whose apparent modesty concealed strategic brilliance and potentially vast wealth, not in cash, but in resources more valuable for the future. He thought about Victor with his expensive car and practiced charm, so certain his aunt was just a confused old woman clinging to worthless mountain property. The miscalculation was almost laughable. Jack's gaze fell on the photograph of his parents that he kept beside his bed. What would they make of his marriage of convenience to secure their land? His father had been a traditionalist, believing in the sanctity of marriage as more than legal contract. His mother, perhaps more pragmatic, might have understood making painful choices to preserve what mattered. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Jack opened the door to find Dorothy standing there, a leather portfolio in her hands. "May I come in?" she asked, her usual directness softened by the lateness of the hour. Jack stepped aside, suddenly, conscious of the cabin's modest furnishings and his own state of partial undress, boots and shirt removed, leaving him in a t-shirt and jeans. Dorothy seemed not to notice, taking a seat at the small table and placing the portfolio before her. "There are additional documents you should review before Monday's meeting with Blackwell." Jack sat across from her, accepting the folder she pushed toward him. Inside were papers detailing the formation of a new entity, Mitchell Hargrove Conservation Trust, with both their names listed as founding trustees. "The ranch will be purchased by the trust," Dorothy explained. "You'll maintain operational control and residence. The trust provides additional protections against future creditors or claims." Jack leafed through the documents, recognizing the careful legal architecture designed to keep both his land and her mining interests secure from outside control. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything, just the important things." Dorothy watched him with those keen blue eyes. "Are you having regrets, Mr. Mitchell?" The formality of the address contrasted with the intimacy of the moment. Late evening, alone in his cabin, discussing their entangled futures. "Not regrets," Jack answered honestly. "Just adjusting to a reality I never imagined." Dorothy nodded once. "Reality is rarely what we imagine it will be. The question is whether we adapt or break when confronted with its unexpected forms." "Like your heritage tomatoes," Jack said, remembering her earlier words about plants that survived because they could adapt. A smile touched Dorothy's lips, genuine and warming her entire face. "Precisely like that. Good night, Jack." After she left, Jack continued reading through the documents, understanding more with each page about the complexity of what Dorothy had constructed over decades. The trust wasn't simply about mining rights or ranch preservation. It established conservation easements, water protections, community benefit provisions, and research endowments. It was a vision for land stewardship that extended far beyond profit, embracing both innovation and preservation. For the first time since their courthouse ceremony, Jack felt something beyond pragmatic acceptance of their arrangement. He felt respect, deep and genuine, for the woman who had seen value where others saw only failure, who had protected resources not just for herself, but for proper use. Dorothy Hargrove had spent a lifetime thinking beyond her own horizon, planning for a world she would not live to see. As he finally drifted towards sleep, Jack realized that in marrying Dorothy, he hadn't just saved his ranch, He had become part of something with purpose, extending beyond a single lifetime. The thought was both humbling and strangely exhilarating. Monday dawned clear and crisp, autumn asserting itself with crimson maple leaves and golden aspens shimmering against the evergreens. Jack dressed with unusual care, selecting his one good suit, last worn to his mother's funeral, and taking time to polish his dress boots. Duke watched the preparations with confusion, unaccustomed to seeing his master. "Informal attire. Not today, boy," Jack told him, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Bank business." Dorothy was similarly prepared when he arrived at the main house, dressed in the same blue suit she'd worn for their wedding, with the addition of a simple strand of pearls. They drove to Silver Creek in her truck rather than his aging pickup. Arriving at First Montana Bank precisely at 9, Richard Blackwell's office smelled of leather and furniture polish, the carefully cultivated atmosphere of rural wealth and stability. The banker sat behind his mahogany desk, fingers steepled beneath his chin, as he examined the documents Dorothy had presented. His expression had cycled from skepticism to surprise to careful neutrality as the meeting progressed. "This all appears to be in order," he said finally, placing the trust paperwork beside the cashier's check that would clear Jack's outstanding loans. "Though I must say, the formation of this conservation trust is unexpected." "The unexpected often proves valuable, Mr. Blackwell," Dorothy replied, her posture relaxed but alert, much like certain properties that appear worthless until viewed through the proper lens. The banker's gaze flickered briefly toward Jack. "Yes, well, the bank is pleased that Mr. Mitchell, or should I say Mr. Mitchell Hargrove, has found a way to retain his family property, though I should note that several interested parties have already expressed interest in the auction. I imagine they have." Dorothy's smile held no warmth. "You'll inform them of the change in circumstances." "Of course." Blackwell's tone suggested he was not looking forward to those conversations. "Once these funds clear, which should be immediate given the instrument, the loans will be marked satisfied and the auction cancelled." He slid a file across the desk toward Jack. "You'll want these, the original note documents with satisfaction, stamps for your records." Jack accepted the file, the weight of it in his hands oddly insubstantial compared to the burden it had represented for so long. "Thank you." As they prepared to leave, Blackwell cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, if I might ask, your sudden interest in ranchland is a departure from the Hargrove family's historical investments. Is there something about the market you're anticipating?" Dorothy paused at the door. "Mr. Blackwell, my family has always invested in resources others undervalue. Good day." Outside, the autumn sun cast long shadows across Main Street. Jack filled his lungs with air that suddenly seemed fresher, lighter. "That's it? Just like that? The ranch is secure?" "The financial threat is neutralized," Dorothy corrected. "But ownership structures are more complex than debt. The trust paperwork will take another few weeks to fully process and record. I don't know how to thank you." Dorothy's expression softened slightly. "This isn't charity, Jack. It's partnership. The land's watershed value alone justifies the investment, setting aside any personal considerations." As they walked toward the truck, Jack noticed Martha Wilson watching from the doorway of her general store. The older woman nodded once, a gesture that conveyed both acknowledgement and something like approval. Jack returned the nod, realizing that his marriage had taken on a different dimension in the public eye, no longer just gossip fodder, but a legitimate alliance. "Coffee?" Dorothy suggested, gesturing toward the Pioneer. "I find financial transactions require caffeination afterward." The diner was half full, mostly with retirees lingering over late breakfasts. Their entrance caused less of a stir than their Friday dinner appearance, though several patrons offered greetings or curious glances. They settled into a booth near the window, Dorothy ordering black coffee, while Jack requested the same, with a slice of Martha's apple pie. "Your land is part of a larger picture," Dorothy said after their orders arrived, keeping her voice low. "The entire watershed feeding from Blue Ridge connects through various properties, including Sundown Ranch. Water rights in the west are complex and often more valuable than the land itself." Jack nodded. Water had always been the ranch's most precious resource, especially during drought years. "Victor will notice what we've done. Count on it." Dorothy sipped her coffee. "The ranch purchase will accelerate his timeline. He'll make his next move within days, not weeks. And you want that? I want him committed to a course of action based on incomplete information." Dorothy's eyes held a strategic gleam. "Victor believes I've spent family resources securing your future, out of some sentimental attachment. He'll leverage that perceived weakness." Jack considered this. "You're using me as bait." "I prefer strategic counterweight," Dorothy replied with the hint of a smile. "But essentially, yes. Victor will focus on you as the simplest means to control what he wants, which is access to the mine and its development rights." Dorothy placed her cup down precisely. "He expects me to die soon, Jack. His calculations revolve around inheritance, not innovation." The bluntness of her assessment was startling, though Jack had come to expect directness from her. "What's your actual health status, if I'm allowed to ask?" "You're my husband. You're allowed." Dorothy's expression remained composed. "I have moderate hypertension, controlled with medication, mild arthritis, no terminal conditions, no cognitive decline. I could live another decade or more, which is precisely what frustrates Victor. His financial position is more precarious than he admits, and he's impatient. So what happens when he makes his move? We respond according to which move he chooses." Dorothy glanced out the window, her gaze tracking a black SUV that pulled to the curb across the street. "And I believe we're about to find out. That's Preston's vehicle." Jack turned to see Victor's lawyer exiting the SUV, briefcase in hand, heading toward the bank. "Should we be concerned?" "Informed, not concerned." Dorothy finished her coffee. "Preston will be attempting to access information about our transaction. Banking privacy laws prevent Blackwell from sharing details, but impressions can be conveyed through careful language." "You've thought of everything." "Not everything." For the first time, a hint of uncertainty crossed Dorothy's features. "Victor is unpredictable when cornered. We should return to the property and ensure everything is secure." The drive back to Pinecrest Lodge carried a new tension, Dorothy checking the rearview mirror with unusual frequency. Jack found himself doing the same, the weight of the situation settling more firmly on his shoulders. His role in Dorothy's strategy was becoming clearer, not just legal protection for her interests, but a deliberate provocation to force Victor's hand. Duke greeted them enthusiastically upon their return, sensing their extended absence. Jack knelt to ruffle the dog's ears, drawing comfort from the simple, honest affection. "I need to check on the cattle," he said, straightening. "Make sure everything's in order at the ranch." Dorothy nodded. "Take my truck. It's more reliable for the terrain. I'll be reviewing documents here." Jack drove down to Sundown Ranch with a strange mixture of emotions. Relief at saving his family legacy, uncertainty about his new role as Dorothy's husband, and wariness about the conflict they were deliberately provoking with Victor. The ranch itself looked unchanged, the weathered buildings and pastures exactly as he'd left them. Only his perception had shifted, seeing now not just a struggling operation, but a piece in a larger strategic puzzle. The cattle grazed peacefully, unaware that their future had been secured that morning with a single signature and cashier's check. Jack checked water troughs and fencing with the same care he always had. the routine physical work grounding him amid the day's financial and legal complexities. Miguel arrived as Jack was repairing a loose board on the barn door, his truck announcing itself with the familiar rattle of a timing belt in need of adjustment. "So it's done?" Miguel asked without preamble, leaning against the barn wall. "The loans are cleared," Jack nodded. "Signed and satisfied this morning. And you're officially Mr. Dorothy Hargrove. Mitchell Hargrove, according to the trust documents." Jack hammered a nail with perhaps more force than necessary. "It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." Miguel studied him with the knowing expression of an old friend. "And you're comfortable with this? Being married to a woman old enough to be your grandmother? For money?" Jack lowered the hammer. "It's more complicated than that, Miguel." "It always is." Miguel sighed. "I worry about you, amigo. This doesn't seem like the Jack Mitchell I've known since you were running around in muddy boots behind your father." The Jack was about to lose everything his family built. He gestured around the ranch. "This land means something. It's not just dirt and grass. It's legacy, I know." Miguel's expression softened. "Your father would understand doing what needs to be done. I'm just making sure you know what you're doing." Jack wasn't certain he fully understood the situation himself, but he nodded anyway. "I do. Dorothy isn't what people think. There's a bigger picture. There always is with the Hargroves." Miguel pushed away from the wall. "Just watch yourself. That nephew of hers has a reputation in Helena. He doesn't lose gracefully." After Miguel departed, Jack completed his ranch chores with mechanical efficiency, his mind processing the morning's events and their implications. The ranch was saved, but at the cost of entangling himself in a decades-old family strategy session with millions potentially at stake. Dorothy claimed to trust his character, but Jack wasn't naive enough to believe she'd revealed all her cards, even to her new husband. Upon returning to Pinecrest Lodge, Jack found Dorothy in her study, surrounded by maps and documents, a focused intensity in her expression that reminded him of a general planning a campaign. She glanced up at his entrance, her features softening marginally. "Everything secure at sundown?" she asked. "As it can be." Jack leaned against the doorframe. "Miguel stopped by. He's concerned about my sudden marriage to an older, presumably wealthy woman." "As any friend would be." Dorothy set down her pen. "Your reputation in town will suffer some damage from this arrangement, Jack. People will assume the worst. That you married me for money, that I married you for other considerations." Her tone remained matter-of-fact, without embarrassment. "Are you prepared for that?" Jack considered the question seriously. "I've never much cared what people think. As long as I can look myself in the mirror, the arrangement makes sense for both of us. That's enough." Dorothy nodded once, apparently satisfied with his answer. "Victor made his first move after our bank meeting. Preston attempted to access information about the transaction, as expected. Additionally, Victor has filed a petition questioning my mental competency. Again, this time citing our marriage as evidence of cognitive decline and manipulation. That won't stick, will it? It wouldn't have before, and it's even less likely now that the trust structure is in place." Dorothy gestured to a document on her desk. "However, we should expect escalation. Victor doesn't accept defeat gracefully." As if summoned by her words, the sound of tires on gravel announced an arrival. Jack moved to the window, not surprised, to see Victor's black car approaching, this time accompanied by a county sheriff's vehicle. "Right on schedule," Dorothy murmured, joining him at the window. Sheriff Cooper is Victor's second cousin, though they've never been close. This is a fishing expedition, not a genuine legal matter. Jack tensed, nonetheless. What do they want? To rattle us, to see our reaction, to look for any sign of irregularity they can use later. Dorothy straightened her shoulders. "Follow my lead. Answer honestly but minimally. And remember, we have nothing to hide regarding our marriage, even if its motivations are not what they assume. Sheriff Tom Cooper was a tall man with the weathered complexion of someone who spent more time outdoors than his office. He approached the house with Victor following close behind, their contrasting postures telling Cooper professional but hesitant, Victor eager and pressing forward like a hound on a scent. Dorothy opened the door before they knocked. "Sheriff, Cooper, Victor, what brings you to Pinecrest today?" Cooper removed his hat, genuine respect in the gesture. "Mrs. Hargrove, or Mitchell now, I suppose. I'm conducting a welfare check. We received a concerned report about your situation." "A report from whom?" Dorothy asked, though her glance toward Victor made the question rhetorical. "That would be confidential, ma'am." Cooper shifted uncomfortably. "Standard procedure is for me to verify your well-being and living conditions." "Of course." Dorothy stepped aside. "Please come in. My husband and I have nothing to hide." Victor's expression tightened at the easy way Dorothy referenced Jack as her husband. He followed the sheriff inside, eyes scanning the room with predatory focus. "As you can see, Sheriff, I'm perfectly well. Living conditions are more than adequate, and I have assistance when needed." Dorothy gestured toward Jack. "Would you care for coffee?" "No, thank you, ma'am." Cooper glanced around the living room, clearly finding nothing amiss. The report mentioned concerns about coercion and isolation. "The only person attempting to isolate me, Sheriff, is standing right there." Dorothy nodded toward Victor. "My nephew has filed multiple unfounded complaints over the years when I've refused to bend to his wishes regarding family assets." Victor stepped forward. "Aunt Dorothy, you've cut yourself off from family, married a man half your age with severe financial problems, and begun liquidating assets. These are concerning behaviors consistent with exploitation." Jack maintained his position beside Dorothy, resisting the urge to respond to Victor's provocations. Dorothy, for her part, remained completely composed. "Sheriff Cooper," she said evenly, "in the envelope on my desk, you'll find documentation of previous frivolous claims made by my nephew, including court dismissals. You'll also find contact information for Dr. Sarah Jensen, who conducted a full cognitive assessment 3 months ago as part of my estate planning updates. I have no objection to you contacting her directly." Cooper accepted the envelope, glancing through its contents with professional thoroughness. "These appear to be in order, Mrs. Mitchell. Additionally," Dorothy continued, "my marriage, while perhaps unconventional in timing, was entered into with full legal awareness and documentation. Judge Marshall can confirm there were no signs of duress or confusion during the ceremony." Victor's facade of concern cracked slightly. "Sheriff, at minimum, you should conduct interviews separately. If she's being influenced, I don't see evidence of that, Dr. Hargrove." Cooper tucked the envelope under his arm. "Mrs. Mitchell appears perfectly cognizant and under no distress. The property is well maintained, and there are no signs of neglect or abuse that would warrant further investigation." "This is absurd," Victor hissed. "She's 75 years old. He's a failing rancher who suddenly marries into mining money. You don't find that suspicious?" Cooper's expression hardened slightly at Victor's tone. "Dr. Hargrove, I understand your concern for your aunt, but my observation doesn't support your claims. Unless you have specific evidence of wrongdoing, not just circumstances you find questionable. There's nothing more to investigate here." Dorothy's slight smile conveyed victory without gloating. "Thank you for your diligence, Sheriff. I appreciate your thoroughness in responding to concerns, however misplaced they might be." After the sheriff departed, Victor remained, his controlled veneer slipping to reveal the frustration beneath. "This little performance doesn't change anything, Aunt Dorothy. Whatever game you're playing with this," he gestured dismissively toward Jack, "marriage of convenience won't hold up under proper scrutiny." "There's nothing improper about our marriage, Victor," Dorothy replied calmly. "Unlike the proposal, You brought me last year from Westlake Mining, the one that would have stripped the mountain bare and poisoned the watershed for generations. Victor's expression tightened. That was a legitimate business opportunity worth millions. Your stubbornness is costing the family legacy. Our definitions of legacy differ significantly. Dorothy moved toward the door, a clear dismissal. Now, unless you have actual business to discuss, my husband and I have matters to attend to. The emphasis on husband was subtle, but unmistakable. Victor glanced between them, calculation visible in his eyes. This isn't over, not by a long shot. After he departed, Dorothy closed the door with deliberate care, her expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. That went as expected, though I anticipated more resistance from Sheriff Cooper. He seemed genuinely concerned for your welfare, Jack observed. Not everyone is aligned with Victor's interests. Tom Cooper is one of the few honest men in county government. His father and mine respected each other. Dorothy moved to the window, watching Victor's car disappear down the drive. This was merely the opening gambit. Victor will escalate, likely targeting you next rather than me directly. Jack absorbed this assessment. How? The ranch is secure now. There are other vulnerabilities. Your reputation, your history, your friends. Dorothy turned to face him. Victor will look for leverage, for anything he can use to drive a wedge between us and undermine the marriage's legitimacy. The prediction proved accurate sooner than either expected. The following morning, Jack drove into town for supplies, noting unusual glances from townspeople as he entered the general store. Martha Wilson's normally friendly greeting seemed strained, her eyes holding a question she didn't voice. "Everything all right, Martha?" Jack asked as she rang up his purchases. The older woman hesitated. "There's been talk, Jack. Rumors about you and Dorothy Hargrove. Mitchell now, I suppose. Gossip's inevitable with any marriage in a town. This is more than gossip." Martha lowered her voice. "Someone's been asking questions about your father's mining investments back in the 70s, suggesting there might have been some improper relationship with the Hargroves even back then." Jack stilled. "What kind of relationship?" "The kind that might explain why you targeted Dorothy for marriage." Martha's expression showed her discomfort with repeating such rumors. "Suggesting your father might have had inside information about the Blue Ridge mine before it closed, that there might be old debts or secrets between the families." The implication was clear, that Jack's marriage to Dorothy wasn't random opportunity, but the culmination of some long-standing, possibly unsavory connection between the families. The strategy was clever. It undermined not just their current arrangement, but retroactively tainted both families' histories. "My father was an honest rancher who never owned a single mining share in his life," Jack said evenly. "Anyone claiming otherwise is either misinformed or deliberately lying." Martha nodded, relief evident in her expression. "That's what I thought. But Victor Hargrove can be very convincing when he wants to be. He's been at the Pioneer every evening this week, buying drinks and telling stories." Jack thanked Martha for the warning and completed his purchase, mind racing with the implications. Dorothy had anticipated Victor targeting him, but not necessarily through his father's reputation. The attack was personal in a way that struck deeper than financial. Maneuvering. When he returned to Pinecrest Lodge, Jack found Dorothy in the garden, kneeling despite her age to tend the raised beds she'd prepared for winter. He explained what Martha had told him, watching Dorothy's expression shift from concentration to sharp calculation. "Predictable but effective," she said finally, brushing soil from her hands as she stood. "Victor knows that in Silver Creek, a man's father's reputation matters nearly as much as his own. By suggesting impropriety in the past, he undermines our present arrangement." "Is there any truth to it?" Jack asked directly. "Any connection between our families I should know about?" Dorothy met his gaze unflinchingly. Your father came too. Mine once, in 1975, seeking permission to run cattle on Hargrove land during a drought season. My father granted it without charge because he respected hard-working men. That's the extent of their relationship. Jack nodded, accepting her answer. Victor's turning the town against us. Against me specifically. Against the idea of us, Dorothy corrected. He wants to isolate you, make you question whether this arrangement is worth the cost to your standing in the community. She studied him with those penetrating blue eyes. Is it? The question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely inquiring, as if Dorothy herself wanted to ensure he remained committed to their arrangement, despite the mounting personal cost. My standing in Silver Creek has always depended on honesty and hard work, not popularity, Jack replied. That hasn't changed. Dorothy's expression softened marginally. Then we proceed as planned. The trust paperwork should be finalized by week's end. Once recorded, even Victor will have difficulty challenging the legal structures we've established. That evening, over a dinner Dorothy prepared with careful attention, venison stew that reminded Jack of meals his mother used to make, they discussed next steps in what had clearly become a campaign, rather than merely a marriage of convenience. Victor believes I've spent family resources securing your future out of misplaced sentiment, Dorothy explained, breaking a piece of sourdough bread. His fixation on our age difference blinds him to the strategic aspects of our arrangement. And what are those aspects exactly? Jack asked. Beyond securing the ranch and protecting the mine rights, Dorothy considered him over her water glass. You're beginning to think like a strategist. Good. She set down her glass precisely. The Mitchell Hargrove Conservation Trust isn't merely a legal entity to hold property. It's a structure designed to implement a very specific vision for sustainable development. She rose and retrieved a folder from her desk, placing it before Jack. Inside were detailed proposals for what could only be described as a revolutionary approach to resource extraction, targeted mining of rare earth elements using methods that minimized environmental impact, concurrent reclamation, water protection protocols exceeding any existing regulations, and profit-sharing structures with the local community. This isn't just mining, Jack said, leafing through the technical documents. It's restoration with resource recovery. Exactly. Approval colored Dorothy's tone. Traditional mining takes everything and leaves destruction. This approach harvests only what's needed while improving the overall ecosystem. It's more expensive initially, but sustainable for generations. And Victor wants conventional open pit extraction instead? Victor wants whatever generates the most immediate profit with the least investment. Dorothy's expression hardened. The companies he's approached prioritize shareholder value over environmental stewardship. They would extract everything valuable in a decade, leaving a wasteland for centuries. Jack continued examining the plans, recognition dawning. These water protection measures, they incorporate Sundown Ranch's watershed. Now you see why securing your property was essential. Dorothy nodded. The entire system requires control of the complete watershed. Your ranch isn't just buffer land. It's an integral component of the water management strategy. The scope of Dorothy's vision was staggering. Not just a mining operation, but a completely integrated approach to resource management that balanced extraction with conservation. Jack found himself genuinely impressed by the thoughtfulness and foresight represented in the plans. How long have you been developing this? He asked. Since 1978, when we officially closed the mine. Dorothy's voice carried the weight of decades, dedicated to a single purpose. My father began the concept. I refined it as technology evolved and environmental science advanced. The trust structure is designed to ensure it proceeds according to plan, regardless of who controls it in the future. Including me, Jack said, understanding now the full implications of their marriage. You've placed me in a position to continue this work. With appropriate guidance and limitations, Dorothy confirmed. The trust documents include specific parameters for development. It cannot proceed without adhering to the environmental standards outlined, regardless of who serves as trustee. Jack closed the folder, a new respect for Dorothy settling alongside his existing wariness. Victor has no idea what he's really fighting for, does he? He knows there's value in the mine. He doesn't understand what kind, how much, or how best to extract it. Dorothy's smile held a hint of satisfaction. His geological knowledge is limited to what consulting firms tell him, and they tell him what conventional wisdom dictates. While you've been researching alternatives for decades, knowledge is often the most valuable resource, Jack, more precious than silver or even rare earth elements. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of a vehicle approaching, unusual for evening hours. Jack moved to the window, tension returning to his shoulders as he recognized Miguel's truck speeding up the drive, headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. "Something's wrong," he said, heading for the door. Miguel barely waited for his truck to stop before jumping out, his expression grave. "Jack, there's been a fire at the ranch, the old barn. Sheriff Cooper sent me to find you while his men and the volunteer department handle it." Cold dread washed through Jack. "How bad?" "Bad enough. Started near the hay storage. They're making sure it doesn't spread to the main structures, but the barn..." Miguel shook his head. "Lo siento, amigo. It doesn't look good." Jack turned to Dorothy, who had appeared in the doorway behind him. Her expression was calm but alert. "Go," she said simply. "Take my truck. It's faster on those roads." As Jack grabbed the keys and headed for Dorothy's truck, Miguel caught his arm. "Jack, Cooper mentioned it didn't look like an accident. Someone cut the lock on the gate." The implications settled like stones in Jack's stomach. Victor had escalated beyond rumors and legal maneuvers. The conflict had turned destructive, targeting not just reputations but livelihoods. As he sped down the mountain toward Sundown Ranch, Jack's mind raced with possibilities and consequences. Victor clearly believed the ranch was simply a romantic gesture from Dorothy, not an integral part of a larger strategy. The miscalculation would cost him eventually, but for now, it was Jack's property bearing the brunt of Victor's frustration. The glow of the fire was visible from a mile away, angry orange light pulsing against the darkening sky. As Jack pulled up to the ranch, the scene that greeted him was controlled chaos. Volunteer firefighters directing hoses at the burning structure, Sheriff Cooper organizing a perimeter, neighbors who had arrived to help standing ready with shovels and buckets. The barn that had stood for 3 generations of Mitchells now smoldered under the Montana night sky, its wooden beams reduced to glowing embers and ash. Jack stood amid the devastation, boots covered in soot, the acrid smell of burned hay and timber filling his lungs. Sheriff Cooper approached, notepad in hand, expression grim beneath the brim of his hat. "Cut lock on the west gate," Cooper confirmed, stopping beside Jack. "Accelerant used near the hay storage." "This wasn't just carelessness, Jack. Someone wanted this building to burn." Jack nodded, a cold, hard knot forming in his chest. "Any witnesses?" "Mrs. Delaney across the valley thought she saw headlights around sunset, but she can't say what. What kind of vehicle?" Cooper closed his notepad. "I'll be straight with you. We both know who benefits from causing you trouble right now, but knowing and proving are different matters." "Victor wouldn't get his hands dirty personally," Jack said, watching as firefighters doused hotspots in the smoking ruins. "No, but money buys all kinds of services in desperate times." Cooper sighed. "I'll keep investigating, but without witnesses or evidence." The sheriff didn't need to finish the sentence. Rural crimes like this rarely resulted in convictions, especially when powerful interests were involved. Jack thanked Cooper and the volunteer firefighters, accepting their sympathetic handshakes and offers of help with rebuilding. The instinctive community response to disaster that remained one of Silver Creek's saving graces. Miguel was the last to leave, lingering as the emergency vehicles departed. "Stay at my place tonight, amigo. This isn't a good night to be alone." Jack shook his head. "I need to secure what's left. Make sure the cattle are settled. They're spooked from the commotion. At least let me help." "I appreciate it, Miguel, but I need some time." Jack managed a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be fine." After everyone departed, Jack stood in the silent aftermath, stars emerging overhead, indifferent to human concerns. The barn had been his grandfather's pride, hand-hewn timber from the property's own trees, constructed with techniques passed down through generations. Its loss was more than financial. It was a severing of physical connection to his family's past. A vehicle's approach drew his attention. Dorothy's truck returning, though not driven by Jack. Dorothy herself sat behind the wheel, navigating the rutted driveway with surprising skill for a woman her age. She parked near what remained of the barn and stepped out, surveying the damage with the analytical eye he'd come to recognize. Not emotionally reactive, but thoroughly assessing. "You shouldn't have driven down here alone at night," Jack said, moving to meet her. "I'm old, not helpless." Dorothy looked from the smoldering ruins to Jack's face. "The building can be replaced. What matters is what it represented to you." The simple understanding in her statement cut through Jack's carefully maintained composure. He turned away, not wanting her to see the emotion threatening to break through. "Victor's behind this," he said, voice rough. "He's escalating." "Yes." Dorothy didn't offer platitudes or denials. "He's becoming desperate, which makes him dangerous, but also careless. Each move reveals more about his true position than he realizes." Jack faced her again. "This isn't just financial maneuvering anymore. This is criminal." "It always was," Dorothy replied calmly, "just in ways less visible than arson." She stepped closer, her small figure somehow commanding in the dimness. "This attack wasn't just against you, Jack. It was against what we're building together, a challenge to see if you'll break under pressure. I don't break easily." "I counted on that quality when I chose you." Dorothy glanced again at the destroyed barn. "We should make arrangements for temporary livestock shelter. The weather will turn soon." Her practical focus pulled Jack back from the edge of anger. There would be time for reckoning with Victor later. For now, there were immediate needs to address. "The old Peterson place has a standing offer to shelter cattle in emergencies," he said. "It's close enough to manage daily. Make the arrangements. In the meantime, you'll stay at Pinecrest." Dorothy's tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "Victor has crossed a line. We respond strategically, not emotionally." When they returned to Pinecrest Lodge, Dorothy surprised Jack by leading him not to the guest cabin, but to her study, where she unlocked a cabinet he'd never seen opened. Inside was a safe, which she accessed with practiced movements, retrieving. A thick folder stamped with legal seals. "These are the final trust documents," she explained, placing them on the desk. "I received confirmation of recording this afternoon, which may explain Victor's timing. The trust is now active and public record." Jack leafed through the documents, noting the detailed provisions for conservation, development parameters, and community benefit structures. His name appeared alongside Dorothy's as founding trustee, with specific rights and responsibilities delineated in precise legal language. "With these filed, Victor can no longer challenge our basic arrangement," Dorothy continued. "His tactics will shift to more direct methods, as we've already seen." "Like burning down my barn?" "That was merely a warning," a demonstration of willingness. Dorothy seated herself behind the desk, fatigue briefly showing through her composed exterior. Tomorrow, the real countermove begins. What do you expect? A formal offer. Dorothy steepled her fingers. Victor will approach with a proposal to buy out your interest in the trust, likely a substantial sum meant to seem generous to a struggling rancher. When that fails, he'll escalate to threats, then to legal maneuvers targeting any potential vulnerability in your history. Jack considered this assessment. Should I meet with him, draw him out? No. Dorothy's response was immediate and firm. Direct engagement plays to his strengths. For now, we maintain our course while preparing countermeasures. She showed Jack to a guest room in the main house rather than sending him to the cabin. A practical decision given the night's events, but one that underscored their shifting relationship. What had begun as an arrangement of convenience had evolved into genuine partnership against external threat. "Get some rest," Dorothy said at the bedroom door. "Tomorrow we begin the next phase." Sleep proved elusive despite physical exhaustion. Jack lay awake, mind cycling through the day's events. The destroyed barn, Victor's calculating hostility, Dorothy's calm, strategic response. He had entered this marriage understanding it as a business arrangement, a practical solution to his financial problems. Now he found himself entangled in a complex family power struggle, with stakes higher than he'd imagined and dangers more immediate than financial ruin. Dawn brought no clarity, only the practical demands of a new day. Jack rose early, checking on Duke, who had spent the night at the foot of his bed, then ventured to the kitchen. To his surprise, Dorothy was already there, dressed and making coffee with efficient movements. "You don't sleep much," he observed. 4 hours is my limit these days." She handed him a mug. "Age has its disadvantages, but it does provide more hours for productivity." They shared breakfast in companionable silence, the routine somehow comforting after the previous night's chaos. Afterward, Jack drove to Peterson's farm to arrange temporary shelter for his cattle, then returned to Sundown Ranch to assess the damage in daylight. The barn's destruction was complete. Only the stone foundation remained intact, the rest reduced to charred timber and twisted metal. Jack sifted through debris, salvaging what little remained usable, some tools stored in a metal cabinet, tack, that had been hanging far from the fire's origin. The work was grueling and disheartening, yet necessary to move forward. Mid-morning, Miguel arrived with his son and 2 ranch hands, wordlessly joining the cleanup effort. By noon, 3 more neighbors had appeared with equipment and supplies. No one mentioned Victor or theories about the fire's origin. They simply worked. The unspoken solidarity of a community that understood loss. Martha Wilson's grandson delivered lunch, sandwiches and thermoses of coffee, with a note from Martha expressing support. The gesture reminded Jack that regardless of Victor's rumor campaign, most of Silver Creek's residents maintained their own judgments based on lifetimes of observation. Sheriff Cooper returned in the afternoon, expression grim. "Found these by the west fence line," he said, holding up a plastic evidence bag containing cigarette butts. "Premium brand, not local. Might be nothing, but worth checking." "Victor smokes that brand," Jack noted, recognizing the distinctive filter. "Many people do," Cooper replied carefully, "but I'll make a note of it." As sunset approached, Jack sent the volunteers home with thanks, promising Miguel he would return to Pinecrest Lodge rather than staying alone at the ranch. The property felt vulnerable now in a way it never had before, not just financially, precarious but physically threatened. When Jack arrived at the lodge, he found Dorothy on the phone, her tone unusually sharp. "That's not acceptable, Lawrence. The mineral rights are explicitly structured within the trust. There is no mechanism for separate negotiation." She paused, listening. "Your client is welcome to present any legitimate offer to the trustees. Beyond that, there's nothing to discuss. She hung up and turned to Jack. Preston fishing for leverage, as expected. They're looking for any separable asset that could be pried loose from the trust structure. No luck, I assume. The legal architecture is sound. Dorothy gestured toward a folder on the table. However, we have another matter to address. These arrived by courier while you were at the ranch. Jack opened the folder to find photographs, dozens of them. Some showed the ranch from various angles, clearly taken with telephoto lenses from surrounding property. Others captured Jack in Silver Creek, speaking with Martha, with Miguel, with other townspeople. Most disturbing were images of Jack and Dorothy together, entering the bank, dining at the Pioneer, standing on Pinecrest's porch. Surveillance, Jack said, closing the folder. Intimidation, Dorothy corrected. Victor wants us to know we're being watched. It's a classic pressure tactic when more direct methods aren't yet feasible. What's our response? For now, awareness and caution. We adjust nothing in our plans. Dorothy moved to the window, drawing the curtains with deliberate care. The trust documentation is complete. The legal structure is secure. Our strategy proceeds as intended. The following day brought Victor's formal move, exactly as Dorothy had predicted. Jack returned from morning chores to find a black sedan, parked outside Pinecrest Lodge, not Victor's car, but an equally expensive vehicle with Helena plates. Inside, Dorothy sat across from a well-dressed woman whose tailored suit and perfect posture screamed corporate attorney. Jack, this is Ms. Diane Weber, representing Westlake Mining Corporation, Dorothy said calmly. She has a proposal she believes might interest us. Weber stood, offering a manicured hand. Mr. Mitchell Hargrove, a pleasure to meet you. Jack accepted the handshake briefly. Ms. Weber, I was just explaining to Ms. Hargrove, excuse me, Mrs. Mitchell, that Westlake has a substantial interest in developing the mineral resources of Blue Ridge, Weber continued, retrieving documents from her briefcase. We're prepared to make an extremely generous offer for full development rights. Jack glanced at Dorothy, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. I'm listening, he said. Weber placed a document on the table, turning it toward them. Westlake is prepared to offer $20 million for complete mineral rights to the Blue Ridge property, with standard environmental compliance guarantees. The figure was staggering. Far more than Jack had imagined even the most generous valuation might produce. If Dorothy's resource assessments were accurate, however, the offer still drastically undervalued the rare earth deposits. That's a substantial offer, Jack acknowledged, maintaining a neutral expression. Westlake recognizes the unique potential of Blue Ridge, Weber replied smoothly. We're also prepared to offer ongoing royalties of 3% on all extracted materials, which could generate significant additional income over the project's lifetime. And the environmental approach? Dorothy asked, her tone conversational despite the tension in the room. Weber smiled. Westlake adheres to all federal and state environmental regulations. Our reclamation record is exemplary by industry standards. Industry standards being notoriously inadequate, Dorothy noted. And water management? We implement best practices for watershed protection naturally. Weber's smile tightened slightly. All our operations meet or exceed regulatory requirements. Dorothy folded her hands on the table. Ms. Weber, your offer fails to address the Trust's fundamental requirements for development. The Mitchell-Hargrove Conservation Trust stipulates extraction methods that exceed regulatory minimums by substantial margins, including zero-discharge water management, concurrent reclamation, and community profit participation beyond standard. Royalties. Those requirements would make development economically unfeasible, Weber replied, dropping her friendly demeanor. No corporation could operate profitably under such restrictions. That assessment reveals more about corporate priorities than actual economics, Dorothy said calmly. Our impact studies and financial models demonstrate otherwise. Weber shifted. Strategy. Mr. Mitchell, perhaps you have a different perspective on this matter. $20 million would certainly resolve any financial concerns regarding your ranch operations, with substantial funds remaining for whatever projects interest you. The transparent attempt to divide them might have been effective if Jack hadn't spent weeks observing Dorothy's strategic thinking and reviewing her comprehensive plans. Ms. Weber, he replied evenly, the Trust's development parameters aren't arbitrary restrictions. They're the foundation of our approach to resource management. Any proposal that doesn't address them isn't worth considering, regardless of value. Frustration flickered across Weber's features before her professional mask returned. I see. Well, Dr. Hargrove suggested you might be more practically minded. The mention of Victor's name was deliberate. Confirmation that Westlake was acting as his proxy in this approach. Dorothy's expression revealed nothing, but Jack sensed her satisfaction at this tactical error. Victor has never understood what practical truly means in the context of land stewardship, Dorothy said. Short-term profit at the expense of long-term. Viability isn't practical, it's extractive thinking. Westlake is prepared to increase our offer to $25 million, Weber countered, revealing her negotiating room too quickly, plus a structured royalty arrangement that could significantly increase overall compensation. The Trust isn't interested in maximizing compensation, Jack said, finding himself genuinely committed to Dorothy's vision rather than simply playing a role. We're interested in responsible development that balances resource extraction with environmental sustainability. Weber gathered her documents with barely concealed irritation. I'll convey your position to my principals. They may wish to revise their approach. After she departed, Dorothy allowed herself a small smile. Well handled. Victor expected you to be tempted by the financial offer. It was substantial, Jack admitted, and nowhere near the actual value of the deposits. Dorothy moved to her desk, retrieving a folder. Our geological assessments indicate rare Earth concentrations worth potentially billions, not millions, especially given increasing technological demand. Jack absorbed this information. Victor doesn't know the true value. He suspects significant, worth but lacks specific data. His approach through Westlake indicates he's seeking corporate backing rather than attempting to develop independently. Dorothy opened the folder, revealing technical reports. These latest assays confirm concentrations of neodymium and dysprosium that exceed initial estimates by substantial margins. The figures were indeed staggering, resources potentially worth billions at current market rates, with value likely to increase as technology increasingly relied on these specific elements. Jack understood now why Dorothy had spent decades developing sustainable extraction approaches. This wasn't merely an environmental position, it was a recognition that responsible management created more value over time than immediate exploitation. Victor will escalate again, Jack noted. This rejection will push him toward more desperate measures. Undoubtedly, Dorothy closed the folder, which is why we're accelerating our timeline. For what? Implementation. She gestured toward a calendar on her desk. Next week, representatives from Sustainable Element Partners will visit to review our development plans. They've expressed interest in backing our approach, not as corporate owners, but as limited partners under the Trust's operating parameters. I've never heard of them. They're a consortium of technology companies seeking secure, ethically sourced rare earth supplies. Dorothy's expression held genuine enthusiasm. Their engineering team has reviewed our extraction proposals and found them not just viable, but potentially revolutionary for the industry. For the first time, Jack fully grasped Dorothy's long game, not just protecting resources from exploitation, but developing them in a way that created a new model for the entire mining sector. The vision was ambitious, idealistic, yet grounded in practical assessments and decades of research. "Victor won't simply accept this," he warned. "No," Dorothy agreed, "which is why we must be prepared for his most desperate play." The warning proved prescient. That evening, as Jack drove back from checking on his cattle at the Peterson farm, he noticed a truck following at a distance, maintaining the same turns, keeping consistent spacing, headlights always in his rearview mirror. When he took a deliberate wrong turn onto a service road, the truck followed before abruptly turning around, confirming his suspicion of surveillance. Upon returning to Pinecrest, Jack found Dorothy reviewing security measures with a contractor, a retired police officer from Helena who specialized in property protection. "Motion sensors along the perimeter," the contractor was explaining, "with notifications to both local law enforcement and your phones. Cameras covering all approaches to the main house and outbuildings. And I recommend upgraded locks on all exterior doors." Dorothy nodded. "Implement everything. Priority on speed rather than aesthetics." When the contractor departed with measurements and specifications, Jack described the truck that had followed him. Dorothy took the information without surprise, adding it to what seemed to be a growing catalogue of concerning incidents. "Victor is becoming erratic," she observed. "The financial pressure on him must be more severe than we realized. His latest ventures in Helena have apparently faltered." "How do you know that?" A small smile touched Dorothy's lips. "I may be semi-retired, but I still maintain contacts in financial circles. Victor has leveraged himself significantly on property developments that aren't performing. His timeline is compressing, making him more dangerous," Jack concluded. "Precisely." Dorothy moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening forest surrounding Pinecrest. "Which is why we need to adjust our own approach." The following days established new patterns. Security equipment appeared and was installed with efficiency. Jack began carrying a satellite phone Dorothy provided, ensuring communication even in areas without cellular coverage. They never traveled alone to remote areas of either property, and Sheriff Cooper increased patrols past Sundown Ranch without being asked. Despite these precautions, Silver Creek itself became increasingly uncomfortable territory for Jack. Victor had taken up semi-permanent residence at the Pioneer, holding court with locals receptive to his charm and generosity. The rumors about Jack's motivations evolved. No longer just suggestions of financial opportunism, but darker insinuations about manipulation and elder exploitation. Most locals maintained polite neutrality when Jack ventured into town, but the atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. Martha Wilson remained steadfastly supportive, as did Miguel and a core group of long-time ranching families. But others kept their distance, uncertain what to believe in the swirl of contradictory narratives. "It's working to some extent," Jack admitted to Dorothy after a particularly tense visit to the feed store, where former acquaintances had suddenly found pressing business elsewhere upon his arrival. "He's isolating us socially. A classic tactic when direct approaches fail," Dorothy replied, unperturbed. "Social pressure can be effective in small communities. Fortunately, our timeline doesn't require popularity." That timeline accelerated unexpectedly when Dorothy received a phone call that visibly energized her despite the mounting pressure. "The Sustainable Element Partners representatives can arrive next week rather than the following month," she announced after ending the call. "Their engineering team has completed preliminary reviews of our extraction proposals and wants to move forward immediately." "That's good news?" "More than good, it's transformative." Dorothy's eyes gleamed with rare excitement. "They're bringing their chief sustainability officer and 3 engineers. If they commit, we'll have not just financial backing but technical validation from industry leaders. Victor will try to interfere, undoubtedly, which is why we're not announcing their visit. Dorothy moved to her desk, retrieving a notebook filled with her precise handwriting. They'll arrive under the guise of environmental consultants assessing watershed quality, plausible given recent regional concerns about mining runoff. The strategy was sound, but Jack felt a growing unease about Victor's next move. His escalation pattern had been consistent, each rebuff met with increasingly aggressive tactics. The surveillance, the arson, the corporate proxy approach through Westlake, all had failed to achieve Victor's goals. Logic suggested whatever came next would be more direct, more personally targeted. Jack's concern proved justified sooner than expected. The following morning, he drove into Silver Creek for supplies, stopping at the post office to collect mail that had accumulated during the chaotic recent days. The postmistress, Ellen Kirkwood, handed him a thick envelope with an expression that mingled curiosity and discomfort. "This came for you yesterday," she said. "Special delivery, had to sign for it." The envelope bore the letterhead of Preston and Associates, Victor's law firm. Jack thanked Ellen and returned to his truck before opening it, revealing a formal legal document and a personal letter on Preston's stationery. The document was a petition filed with the county court alleging elder abuse, financial exploitation, and undue influence against Dorothy Hargrove by Jack Mitchell. The attached letter from Preston was brief and to the point. "Mr. Mitchell, this filing can proceed to court with significant damage to your reputation regardless of outcome, or it can be withdrawn upon your agreement to discuss reasonable terms regarding Blue Ridge mineral rights. Dr. Hargrove suggests meeting at the Pioneer tomorrow at noon to explore mutually beneficial arrangements. Consider carefully before responding." The threat was explicit, yet carefully worded to avoid clear evidence of extortion. Jack read it twice, noting the calculated balance between legal aggression and plausible deniability. The petition itself contained numerous distortions and outright falsehoods about his relationship with Dorothy, crafted to paint the most damaging possible picture for public consumption. When Jack returned to Pinecrest and showed the documents to Dorothy, her reaction was not anger but calculated assessment. "Predictable," she said, scanning the petition's allegations. "The timing suggests Victor knows about the Sustainable Element Partners visit, despite our precautions." How would he know? Possibilities include monitoring our phone lines, paying for information from service providers, or having informants within organizations we've contacted. Dorothy set down the document. The specific method matters less than the confirmation that he's desperate enough to file formal allegations. "These claims could cause serious problems," Jack noted. "Even without winning in court, the publicity alone would be damaging in the short term but ultimately ineffective," Dorothy finished for him. "The trust documents are filed and legally binding. Victor is attempting to create leverage where none exists legally." "Should I meet with him?" Dorothy considered the question carefully. "Yes, but not alone, and not at the Pioneer where he controls the environment. Counter with a meeting here, with both of us present and Sheriff Cooper as a witness." Jack drafted the response following Dorothy's guidance, delivering it personally to Preston's office in Silver Creek, a small satellite location the attorney maintained for local matters. The counter-proposal was simple: meeting at Pinecrest Lodge the following day at 10 a.m., with Sheriff Cooper present to ensure all parties feel secure in the discussion. Preston accepted by phone within the hour, his tone suggesting Victor had anticipated this counter and already planned accordingly. The ease of acceptance heightened Jack's wariness rather than alleviating it. That evening, as security lights illuminated Pinecrest perimeter and cameras monitored every approach, Jack and Dorothy reviewed their strategy for the coming confrontation. Victor will attempt to separate us, Dorothy predicted, seated at her desk with the calm precision of a military strategist. He'll appeal to your practical nature, suggest that my age makes me unreasonable or sentimental about the land. He'll offer what seems like a generous compromise, which would still violate the trust parameters. Of course, Dorothy nodded approvingly at Jack's understanding. When that fails, he'll move to threats, more specific than the lawsuit, possibly, involving your remaining assets or relationships in town. Jack hesitated before asking the question that had been forming since receiving Preston's letter. Do you think he's behind the barn fire? Dorothy's expression remained carefully neutral. I think Victor creates conditions where his desires are understood by people willing to take actions he can plausibly deny directing. Whether he personally ordered it is almost irrelevant. His approach ensures such things occur. The assessment was chilling in its clarity. Dorothy had spent decades observing her nephew's methods, understanding his patterns of indirect manipulation and calculated pressure. She'd developed countermeasures with the same deliberate patience she applied to her sustainable mining plans, thinking in decades rather than days. Get some rest, Dorothy suggested as the evening grew late. Tomorrow requires clear thinking, not fatigue. Jack nodded, heading toward the guest room that had become his de facto quarters since the barn fire. At the doorway, he paused. What happens after tomorrow? After Victor makes his play and we refuse again? Dorothy's expression softened slightly. Then we implement the vision we've built, regardless of opposition. Some battles can't be avoided, Jack. They can only be won. Morning arrived with the clarity that often follows mountain storms. Air washed clean, distant peaks sharp against the blue sky. Jack stood on Pinecrest's porch, coffee mug warming his hands as he watched the eastern light transform the valley below. Dorothy joined him silently, her presence announced only by the subtle scent of the lavender soap she favored. Beautiful day for a confrontation, she observed, accepting the mug Jack offered. Weather doesn't much care about human disputes. One of its better qualities. Dorothy's gaze moved from the landscape to Jack's face. Are you prepared? Before he could answer, the sound of vehicles approaching drew their attention. Not one, but 3 cars made their way up the drive. Preston's sedan, Victor's black car, and an unmarked SUV Jack didn't recognize. Dorothy's expression remained calm, though her eyes narrowed slightly at the unexpected third vehicle. It seems Victor has brought reinforcements, she noted. Interesting. Sheriff Cooper arrived moments later, parking his patrol vehicle with a clear view of the proceedings. He approached Jack and Dorothy with a professional nod, positioning himself on the porch as the 3 other vehicles parked in a loose semicircle. Victor emerged first, impeccably dressed as always, followed by Preston. From the SUV stepped a man in a Forest Service uniform, regional director level based on the insignia. The trio approached the house with Victor leading, his expression set in practiced concern. "Aunt Dorothy," he called, climbing the porch steps. "I hope you're well despite these difficult circumstances." Dorothy's response was polite, but cool. "Victor, Mr. Preston, and Director Watkins, if I'm not mistaken. This appears more like a delegation than a discussion." The Forest Service Director nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm here at Dr. Hargrove's request regarding potential environmental concerns about your property." Jack maintained his position beside Dorothy, noting how Victor had orchestrated this entrance, bringing official authority to add weight to his presence. Sheriff Cooper remained a silent observer, his expression neutral but attentive. "Please, come inside," Dorothy said, gesturing toward the door. "Though I'm curious what environmental concerns might suddenly require attention on land my family has managed for generations." The group moved to the living room, Victor automatically taking a seat in what appeared to be a position of authority. with Preston and Director Watkins flanking him. Jack and Dorothy sat opposite, maintaining a united front, while Sheriff Cooper positioned himself near the doorway, present but not directly involved. "Let's dispense with pretense," Victor began, leaning forward. "This situation has become untenable. The legal actions we've initiated are just the beginning of what could become a very public, very damaging process for everyone involved. Particularly for you," Dorothy replied calmly. "Legal harassment of elderly landowners rarely plays well in court or community." Victor's smile tightened. "Director Watkins is here because recent satellite imagery has identified concerning changes in the watershed originating from Blue Ridge, potentially linked to the old mine site." Watkins cleared his throat. "We've observed some anomalous readings in downstream water testing. Nothing conclusive, but sufficient to warrant investigation under our statutory authority." Jack recognized the strategy immediately, using environmental regulations as a weapon, a common tactic against landowners who lacked resources to fight government inspections. Dorothy, however, seemed entirely unperturbed. "How interesting," she said, "particularly since our own water monitoring, conducted weekly for the past 40 years, shows no such anomalies. I'd be happy to share our complete testing records, including independent laboratory verification." Victor waved this aside. "The concern isn't historical but current. Director Watkins has the authority to order comprehensive site inspection, including areas that have been restricted from access." The implication was clear. Victor had somehow convinced the Forest Service to force access to the sealed mine under environmental pretexts. It was a clever approach, using regulatory authority to bypass property rights Dorothy had so carefully protected. "Before we proceed with any site inspections," Dorothy said, "I should mention that Sustainable Element Partners will be arriving tomorrow with their own environmental engineering team, specifically to address watershed protection in advance of potential development." Victor's expression flickered. "What development?" "A revolutionary approach to rare earth extraction with zero discharge water management," Dorothy replied. "Their scientists have reviewed our preliminary assessments and found them promising enough to warrant immediate exploration." Preston leaned toward Victor, murmuring something too low to hear. Victor's composure slipped momentarily before he regained control. "Any development requires family trust approval," he said sharply, "which would never be granted for unproven experimental methods." "The Mitchell-Hargrove Conservation Trust now controls those rights," Dorothy corrected, "as recorded with the county last week. The family trust's mineral interests were legally transferred as part of my marriage settlement." And for the first time, genuine shock registered on Victor's face. "That's impossible. The family trust has perpetual succession clauses specifically designed to prevent such transfers." "Had," Dorothy agreed, "until the amendment approved 3 years ago, allowing transfer into qualified conservation structures. The provision you dismissed as sentimental environmental nonsense when you signed off on it." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Victor turned to Preston, whose expression confirmed Dorothy's statement. Jack watched this exchange with new understanding. Dorothy hadn't just been defensive in her strategies, she'd been laying groundwork for years, using Victor's own dismissiveness against him. "This is elder manipulation," Victor snapped, gesturing toward Jack. "He's convinced you to sign away family resources built over generations." "Actually," Dorothy said with surprising gentleness, "I convinced him. Jack had no idea of the potential value when we married. He agreed to the arrangement. To save his ranch, not to gain control of mineral rights he didn't know existed." Sheriff Cooper shifted positions slightly, his presence a reminder of the limits of acceptable discourse. Victor noticed the movement and moderated his tone, though his expression remained tense. "Director Watkins," he said, turning to the forest, "service official, Regardless of ownership questions, your authority to investigate potential contamination remains valid. Watkins nodded, though he appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the family dispute. That's correct, though if ongoing water monitoring shows no issues... Here's what's going to happen, Dorothy interrupted, her voice carrying unexpected authority for her small stature. Director Watkins will receive our complete water testing records, dating back to mine closure. Sustainable Element Partners will conduct additional independent testing as part of their assessment. If any legitimate concerns arise, they'll be addressed through proper channels. She stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. As for the legal threats, Mr. Preston, I suggest you review the trust documents carefully before proceeding. The construction is quite specific regarding attempted interference. Victor remained seated, his calculated charm replaced by cold anger. This isn't over, Aunt Dorothy. That mine contains resources worth billions in the right hands. Your misguided, environmental idealism is depriving the family of its rightful legacy. Legacy isn't measured only in dollars, Victor. Dorothy's expression held something like pity. My father understood that. Your father never did. After the delegation departed, Victor barely containing his fury, Preston making apologetic noises, Watkins clearly relieved to escape the family tension. Sheriff Cooper lingered briefly. That went about as expected, he observed, though I suspect Dr. Hargrove won't be deterred for long. We're counting on that, Dorothy replied cryptically. Thank you for your presence, Sheriff. When Cooper too had gone, Jack and Dorothy stood on the porch, watching the vehicles disappear down the mountain road. The confrontation had revealed dynamics Jack hadn't fully understood, not just Victor's determination, but Dorothy's meticulous, years-long preparation. You knew he'd try using environmental regulations, Jack said. That's why you've maintained water testing for decades. Dorothy nodded. Victor has always seen regulations as tools for manipulation rather than protection. It was inevitable he'd attempt this approach once direct methods failed. The transfer amendment was brilliant, Jack admitted. He never saw it coming. Victor has a habit of ignoring details he considers beneath his expertise. Dorothy smiled slightly. A character flaw I've found useful on multiple occasions. As they returned inside, Jack found himself studying Dorothy with new appreciation. Her strategic thinking extended far beyond what he'd initially recognized, not just reacting to threats, but anticipating moves years in advance, laying groundwork Victor never noticed until too late. What happens now? Jack asked. Now we proceed. With implementation, Dorothy moved to her desk, retrieving plans for the Sustainable Element Partners visit. Victor will attempt legal challenges to the trust transfer, but they'll fail. He'll then likely approach you directly, without witnesses, with some combination of threats and financial inducements. And when that fails, he'll either accept defeat or make one final desperate move. Dorothy's expression grew serious, which is why we'll maintain security measures for the foreseeable future. The next morning brought the arrival of the Sustainable Element Partners team, 4 professionals whose expertise was evident in their focused questions and technical discussions. They toured the property with Dorothy and Jack, paying particular attention to watershed dynamics and proposed extraction sites. Their initial skepticism visibly transformed to excitement as Dorothy explained decades of research and planning. This approach is at least 10 years ahead of industry standards, the lead engineer commented, reviewing Dorothy's technical specifications. The water recirculation system alone could revolutionize extraction practices. That's precisely the intention, Dorothy replied. Profitable extraction without permanent environmental degradation. Jack observed these interactions with growing understanding of Dorothy's true achievement, not just protecting land from exploitation, but developing methodologies that could transform an entire industry. What had begun as her father's defensive closure of a family mine had evolved into a vision for responsible resource management that maintained profitability while preserving ecological systems. As the team conducted testing and compiled data, Jack found himself drawn into technical discussions where his practical knowledge of the land complemented Dorothy's scientific expertise. His role wasn't merely legal protection for her interests, but substantive contribution to implementation. His understanding of water flow patterns, seasonal variations, and local conditions proved valuable to the engineers developing site plans. The partnership that had begun as arrangement of convenience had evolved into genuine collaboration, each bringing distinct strengths to their shared vision. On the Sustainable Element Partners' final day, their Chief Sustainability Officer presented preliminary findings in Dorothy's study. "We're prepared to commit significant resources to this project," she announced. "Our board has authorized initial development funding of $50 million, with additional capital available as milestones are achieved." The figure was twice what Westlake had offered for complete control. Yet this partnership preserved the trust's authority and environmental requirements. Dorothy accepted the news with characteristic composure, though Jack detected a hint of satisfaction in her slight smile. The initial implementation timeline would begin next quarter, the officer continued, with full production capacity within 18 months. After the team departed with signed preliminary agreements, Dorothy and Jack stood on the porch in the golden afternoon light. For the first time since Jack had known her, Dorothy's posture betrayed fatigue. Not defeat, but the natural weariness that follows long-sought achievement. 46 years, she said quietly. From the day we closed the mine until now, almost half a century of planning, waiting, and preparing. Jack studied her profile, seeing not just the aging woman who had proposed their unconventional marriage, but the visionary who had dedicated her life to proving responsible stewardship could coexist with resource development. "Your father would be proud," he said. Dorothy turned to him, her blue eyes clear and direct as always. "As would yours, I think. Different methods, but similar principles, protecting legacy while adapting to necessity." That evening, as they shared a quiet dinner celebrating the partnership agreement, Dorothy surprised Jack by producing a small wooden box from her desk drawer. She placed it between them on the table, her expression unusually hesitant. "I had intended this for later," she said, "but today's developments suggest timing is appropriate." Jack opened the box to find a simple silver ring, handcrafted with a subtle pattern of mountains along its band. "Dorothy, when we married, it was arrangement rather than alliance," she explained. "Circumstances have evolved. This represents not romantic attachment, but genuine partnership. Acknowledgement that what began as transaction has become shared purpose." Jack understood the significance of the gesture from this most practical of women, recognition that their relationship had transcended its original parameters to become something neither had anticipated. He slipped the ring onto his finger, finding it fit perfectly. "I never expected to find purpose again after losing the ranch," he admitted. "You've given me more than security, Dorothy. You've given me legacy worth building." She nodded once, accepting his words without sentiment, but with evident understanding. "We make a formidable team, Jack Mitchell." 3 days later, news reached them that Victor had departed Silver Creek abruptly, leaving Westlake Mining's offers withdrawn and his legal challenges abandoned. Sheriff Cooper reported that financial troubles in Helena had apparently demanded Victor's immediate attention. Property investments failing catastrophically, creditors closing in. "Convenient timing," Dorothy observed when they received this information. Her tone suggested the convenience might not be entirely coincidental. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Did you have something to do with his sudden financial crisis?" "Let's just say information about certain regulatory investigations sometimes reaches interested parties through appropriate channels." Dorothy's expression remained neutral, though her eyes held a hint of satisfaction. Victor always did overlook important details in his development projects. As spring transformed the Montana landscape, changes came to both Pinecrest Lodge and Sundown Ranch. Construction began on a new barn, designed with input from both Jack and Dorothy, blending traditional timber framing techniques with modern efficiency. The Mitchell-Hargrove Conservation Trust established offices in Silver Creek, bringing professional staff and economic revitalization to the struggling town. Dorothy's vision began taking physical form as preliminary site work commenced at Blue Ridge under Sustainable Element Partners' careful management. Each step followed the meticulous plans she had developed over decades, measuring twice, moving forward deliberately, prioritizing watershed protection alongside resource recovery. What had begun as a poor rancher's desperate marriage to an elderly mining heiress had transformed into genuine partnership built on shared values and mutual respect. Dorothy's secret fortune proved to be not just mineral wealth, but wisdom. The foresight to recognize that true legacy combines stewardship with innovation, preservation with progress. Jack found himself not just secure, but purposeful. His understanding of the land complementing Dorothy's scientific knowledge in ways neither could have anticipated. Together, they demonstrated that responsible development wasn't merely idealism, but practical, profitable reality, creating a model others would eventually follow. The wealth beneath Blue Ridge Mountain would indeed change lives, not through quick extraction and profit, but through sustainable management that would benefit generations to come. In the end, Dorothy's greatest fortune wasn't what lay beneath the mountain, but the vision to see what it could become in the right hands. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.